Does your personality type make you a good negotiator or a bad negotiator? I'll tell you more, so stay right here. Negotiations don't just happen in the boardroom, they happen in everyday life. I'm Susie Tomenchok, expert negotiator, author, and TEDx speaker. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to show you the art of negotiation without manipulation so you can level up, know your worth, and adopt a negotiator mindset. Let's go. Hey friend, welcome. I am so glad that you're here. We're going to talk about adopting a negotiator mindset as we always do. And this one is all around personality types. And when I'm talking about personality types, I'm talking extroverts, introverts, and ambiverts. Now, if you've probably heard extroverts are the people that gain energy from being around people. They tend to talk a lot. If you don't know, I actually have gotten tested and I am extremely on the side of extrovert. I'm like almost one click from the highest number of being an extrovert. The other side of that is introverts, and introverts get their energy from being alone. To recharge. They are people that commonly, I don't like to use stereotypes, they like to think things through and really be thoughtful about their answers. I wish I could do that. I don't think things through. They just kind of come out. They talk, they think and then talk, where extroverts often just talk out loud to think, and that can get you in trouble. So introverts are the more quiet, maybe. They're the ones that are thoughtful. They want to take a little bit more time. Oh, I just think about that. I think I need to be more like that. I have two kids that are one that's very much an introvert. I have another one that's an extrovert. I have one that's right in the middle. So the middle is ambivert. And that is just in the scale of introvert and extrovert, that's like dead set in the middle. So they do like to socialize. They do think out loud. They get energy from people, but they also need a nice dose of recharging. So understanding where you fall is really key in this whole episode, because I'm going to talk about the research around these personality types. And it's fascinating because I want you to think about, before I go into the research, which personality type do you think is the best negotiator? And you might picture, a sales executive or a salesperson, and the real bubbly, outgoing, the ones that can just talk to anybody in a crowd. That might make your decision for you. You might think about somebody that is very well prepared, that's thoughtful about their response, that builds trust from maybe over time, but because they're consistent and they do exactly what they say they will. Not that extroverts wouldn't, but you might start to surmise around which personality would be the best in a sales. And I will tell you, it is the middle. And what they did, the studies that I've read about, they took 300 sales executives, sales team members, and they looked at their results. And then they blocked them by extrovert, introvert, and ambivert. And what they found was the ambiverts were the best in their sales results, because ambiverts, when you think about what an extrovert does well, they tell the story. They're really they're forward with the value. They're making their stance. They're not afraid. They're being very verbal. And introverts are, so they're telling the story. Extroverts tell the story, right? They really think about the needs of the other party, and they're really forceful about what they say. I can say this because I'm one. And then introverts will listen to the concerns of the other person, will let them take the lead. Very stereotypically, I'm saying this. But the ambivert will have a nice balance. They'll frame their story, they'll tell the value, they'll talk about it, and they'll listen. They'll listen, and not just listen, they'll let the other person feel that they're listened to and that they're understood. So I love this research so much, because as an extrovert, it's made me think about, even though I believe that I listen well, I need to illustrate that by practicing silence, by repeating what the other person said, because I think so quickly. We all think faster than the other person's talking. And so I get energy and I get really excited when they're talking, and I know that we can solve their problem, or I have some ideas that I'm quick to jump in. because I heard them so well. That's how it feels to me. But really, they don't feel like I'm listening very well because I jump in so much. And where introverts may not gregariously tell the value, they may not feel comfortable, just they might feel pushy if they don't tell the story as well as an ambivert. So think about where you fall on that, and think about how do you, in a cadence of a conversation, how do you illustrate not only the value or your point that you're trying to make, but you're giving space to the other side. So I try to think like an ambivert, especially when I'm building relationships, when I'm negotiating, when I'm need to be very thoughtful about a high stakes situation and the important outcome for me and the other side. So I'll give you some specific examples when we return. So stay right there, but be thinking about where do you fall on that spectrum. We'll be right back. All right. So I have so many stories to illustrate when being a certain personality type has been a benefit and a detriment. And I often talk about my peer Dan, and we had a client. It was a sports network, and that client was Dan's. And Dan would take her out to lunch and do all these deals with her. And she came to me one time and wanted to know if she could transition to me as her point of contact. And it was really because of the fact that she didn't feel that Dan understood or listened to her. He was such an extrovert and just really valued his opinion and his contribution that she didn't feel heard. And she wanted, not only for herself, but for her network, wanted somebody that would really take time to understand and listen. And I think back on that because of her comment, I had to make sure that we showed up in a way that illustrated that we were listening and understanding. And that meant repeating, that meant allowing there to be silence, because Dan would just fill the void. And so she didn't feel cared for. And she didn't feel like she had a trusted relationship with him. And there were a lot of contributing factors, but one of them was that fact that he just was filling space. And it makes me think of a current client, an executive level person. And we were having a senior leadership meeting, a day long, and I was facilitating some professional development content. And so there was probably 60 people in the room, and he was one of the leaders that a group of these people reported up to. And I asked the senior leaders in this group to share a little bit of their insight. And his first peer went, and his second peer went, and then he went. And he took up more than double in terms of time when he made his comments. And you could tell, I was just kind of watching the room. People started to tune out and not listen. And you could tell it became a habit because he would fill so much of the space. And so I like to have people understand that in a meeting, in an engagement where it's a collection of people, really be thoughtful of that space that you're carrying. So if you're an extrovert, don't fill so much and over taking the lead, if you will, of the conversation. And don't be like a typical introvert where you only speak up a few times. Think about the space that you fill. If you're not filling enough, fill more. If you're filling too much, lessen it. And there's evidence, or there's a research around we listen the least quality wise to the people that are closest to us. And I think that's because of this idea that we get used to personality types. We get used to somebody that just fills too much. And so we tune them out, or we get used to the way somebody doesn't fill the space And so we don't pay as attention until we need to. So disrupting our patterns on how we show up can help the other person awake, or I shouldn't say awake, like be more aware of, oh, they stopped talking. What did they say? I need to think about that. Or they asked me a question. I got to think about my answer. It disrupts our awareness in that moment. So I also think about a client of mine who was negotiating a big deal, and she was the key negotiator, and she was petite and soft spoken, but man, when she had something to say, people listened. So she commanded this, she had deep respect by the people in her organization, by the clients and the vendors that they used. And she had to negotiate this big deal, and she intentionally brought somebody on her team with her because it was hard for her to, in the moment, think on her feet, to add additional color. And so she brought somebody else on her team to kind of fill some of those spaces. So that gave her time when they were talking to think about what her point was that she wanted to make next. And that allowed her that space to make space for herself. So she understood that as an introvert, she needed to make sure that she made her points probably bigger, stronger, with more time than she normally did, to make sure that she was articulating the value. And she used that other person to be her conduit, to give her brain time to think about what she wanted to say next. She's a very powerful executive who understands how to supplement her approach to be most effective in the moment. And when she has to do it on her own, where she's solo, she does a lot to prepare some of the questions that she needs to ask, how she wants to tell the story, so that she's very thoughtful beforehand, that she kind of practices like an extrovert. So she thinks about, how can I really communicate the value to the other side? And she does that in negotiations. She does that with her one-on-ones with her people, especially if it's a difficult conversation, which she says is high stakes for her. She doesn't like to go in those conversations. And so it's more important in those times when they do feel high stakes to her, that she thinks about and plans for the value that she wants to articulate, or the impact that this high stakes situation is going to have, to tell the story and make time for that. So where do you fall? I want to give you some tips on thinking about your personality trait, how you naturally show up, so that you can make some adjustments where applicable, when it makes sense, to make you more impactful in a high stakes situation. We'll be right back with 3 tips. Okay, so the first tip is to think about the personality trait of the person in front of you. And that should really color the way you should show up. Because if you are sitting in front of an extrovert and you're an extrovert, you might have a different approach than if you're sitting in front of an introvert. Because what that research also showed was that the personality trait on the other side appreciates deeply their common personality trait, right? So an introvert understands the language of an introvert. An ambivert understands the language of an ambivert, and as you get it. With an extrovert, same thing. So understanding how that other person needs you to show up, so you can adjust your approach for that. You might add more silence if you want to give them time to think it through. If they're an introvert, you might be very conscious about how you make sure that both parties, you included, are sharing time. So thinking about the ways they show up will make you be more intentional about how you'll show up, because it might be that you need to be truly your natural self, but you may need to adapt to their style, or be able to say in those moments, what is important to you? How can I make sure that I show up in a way that will serve you today? So that's tip number 1. All right. So the second tip is to identify who you are and start being a great observer of yourself. They say that great leaders should talk 30% of the time And I'll talk to so many leaders who will be like, oh, I listen all the time. But then their team will often say they cannot get a word in edgewise. So to me, that means that we don't always, we believe we might be showing up differently than we are. So taking time to even put a metric around watching your regular behaviors. Are you jumping in a group conversation every time somebody else talks? Is that serving you? How is that making other people adjust to you? So being aware of how you're showing up and if it's working for you in your situations and thinking about what are those natural tendencies for you. I've had to think and be really thoughtful about me as an extrovert and how that feels to other people. And that's hard for me because I get so excited when other people share that I want to jump right in and share kind of and me too. And to me, that's saying, oh, I see you. I understand you. I'm going to add to what you just said. But to them, it might be like, can I just have my moment? Can you just say, that's a really interesting story and stop? Or that's a really interesting fact. I hadn't thought about that. So be an observer of yourself and understand how you're showing up and if it is working for you or not. All right, so the last tip, the third tip is a tough one. It's looking back at your conversations. It's being true and honest with yourself and say, okay, was that a win? Did I achieve what I needed to in that conversation? And if so, what really worked well? It's looking back, it's reviewing and looking at it from this personality trait perspective. How is my personality that I was born with, that comes naturally to me? How is this applied in any situation to give me the best results that I can? Just like in real estate, it's location, 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 and that drives up the value. In a negotiation, it's prepare, 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 because that is the best way to be real intentional and get what you need at the end. Looking back is just as important. Reviewing what worked for you. So in this instance, think about what situation that I just finished, write down what worked really well, how would I measure the cadence? And if you have somebody that you just met with that is a close friend or somebody you trust, ask them how you showed up, or even ask people in general about your personality trait and when they enjoy that aspect of you and when it might be getting in your way. So being an observer of yourself. So the 3 tips are: think about the personality trait of the other person and what they need and how you can show up for them. The second is adapting to that. How can you adapt the way you show up, whether it's showing up less or showing up more, meaning like making space in that conversation. And then the third is to review, look back on, see what's working for you. Be an observer of this personality trait for you and hone it in a way that you, in any situation, you can apply it in the way that will work best for you. Such an important thing to consider that isn't always top of mind, but let that be for you this week. When we come back, I'll tie this all together, give you something to think about, and then I want to hear from you about how you applied your personality trait in a different way. We'll be right back. All right, so this is where the pedal hits the metal or the rubber hits the road, however, whatever you want to use here. As a coach, I can give you some great content. It's up to you to really apply it. So I'm going to talk about the stop, start, and continue. I want you to think about what you need to do. So what are you going to stop doing in light of this personality trait? Mine is going to be, I'm going to stop being the first person to talk. It's very natural for me. I'm going to be the second person to talk. That's going to be the thing that I'm going to stop doing, is being the first person. What am I going to start doing? I'm going to think about, before I go into a situation with somebody, is think about what their natural tendencies are. I'm going to start doing that, because just like thinking about the interests of the other party increases the results of the interaction, I think considering the natural tendency, the way that person likes to communicate, will also have the same results. So what are you going to start doing? What are you going to do differently? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to start doing? And what are you going to continue to do? I will continue to be very aware of this. I'm really good at, in the moment, being able to self-identify and go, okay, you need to slow down, or I'm losing them, or let them talk more. So I think I'm going to continue to do that. So what are you going to continue to do? This is an important element of us because it's something that's so natural that we were born with that it's completely invisible to us. We benefit from this personality trait for ways we don't really always appreciate. So be an observer of yourself and the people around you so that you can figure out how to leverage this as you continue to adopt a negotiator mindset, and be thoughtful about that middle ground, that ambivert, the one that can really articulate the value, frame the ask, frame the conversation, and react and respond to the person in the moment, because that's their natural state. They have a clean balance of talking and listening. And so what a nice combination if you think about yourself as kind of a weight on one side or the other, kind of that lever. You want it to be equal. You're talking to your listening. So it doesn't feel overwhelming, but it doesn't feel like not enough. So what are you going to adjust so that you will show up differently in every situation, especially high stakes? When the stakes are high, this is an important thing to consider. And even as a leader, who of your people are on the right side, that extrovert side, that take up too much space? And how are you going to draw out other people that might be on that introvert space so that their voices is heard? As leaders, it's important for us to help our people show up in their best way and to challenge them so that in that uncomfortable way, they gain that muscle memory so that they can show up really well, or be developing in a way that brings them to that balance. We could all be better people if we would try to balance what we say and how well we listen. Having more of a balance can help you maneuver, navigate, and negotiate in any situation you face. So glad you made the choice to be here today. I'd love to hear your story of how you applied this mindset. I love hearing from you. Head over to negotiationlove.com. You can find me there. And remember, negotiation is more than a skill. It is truly a mindset. Until next time.